Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes. Today I am joined by Laura Bradburn and Colin Watt for the Matchday Special. Welcome to the show, guys. We'll be talking about the Livingston match coming up. Colin, you've already spoken to a couple of people in the Livingston camp. We'll be looking at the Celtic lineup. We'll be trying to figure out the shape. And straight off the bat, we'll be going into some of the comments that are coming in. Here's the first one coming in from the Dude Abides. Why is Brown playing? By the way, I love that avatar of the day. You're watching on YouTube. The reason I'm bringing this up, guys, is we heard obviously from the club that captain, leader and legend Scott Brown will have a Celtic Park tribute at the end of the season. The last game at Celtic Park will be a tribute to Scott Brown on the 12th of May. Our illustrious captain will be closing the door on a trophy-laden career at Celtic Park. Last week, John Kennedy was talking about sentimentality. Colin Watt, is this a wee bit more sentimental? The fact that Scott Brown's in the team, would you rather have sorrow in there?
I guess when you look at it, you're starting to plan ahead for next season, and to see Scott Brown still in there, you're thinking, look, there's guys like, and I've seen it in the comments already, Henderson that should be maybe given a go. Guys that are definitely going to be there next year, but I think Kennedy's really got one eye on the game next week, and he's also got an eye on the Scottish Cup final, and he's determined to get the most amount of points that he can, because let's be honest, he probably still thinks that he's in with a running of getting the job. So if he can put the team on the park that goes and wins the 3 points, that's more important to him than player development. Do
you think he is still in the running, Colin? What's your honest opinion on that? Is he in the running for the Celtic job?
Personally, I don't think so. But I mean, he's got every right to think he is, because he's the person that's in caretaker position at the minute. He's kind of trying to guide the team through as best as he possibly can. And all he has to do is take a look at what happened to Neil Lennon when he was in caretaker charge. He was given the job. So Kennedy's got every right to think that he's in with it. It's probably what he wants to do. He wants to move into management. It's his audition as such. As much as us as Celtic fans, and everybody will say, no, they don't want him as Celtic manager, but he's got that position to kind of prove that it's his and his to keep. It's up to him how he plays it.
Well, when you actually hear anything that Kennedy says about the job, he's obviously very careful with the words he uses, but he's never said, I'm in it, I want it, any of this kind of stuff. He just says, I will conduct myself as a Celtic manager until I'm told otherwise. But on the subject of Scott Brown, Laura, I've already said, without a shadow of a doubt, with next week in mind, and with any Scottish Cup run in mind, I would be playing sorrow in there. What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it was interesting to hear what Colin said there, because I think, obviously, and this is speaking as somebody who's made my thoughts on Scott Brown clear over the last few weeks and months. He's never been a favourite of mine. I can understand that there might be a desire to involve him in games more because he's leaving for maybe a sentimental reason or whatever. But to me, it comes down to looking at the squad we have, who is the best team that we can pick for this game today to try and win this game. Mm-hmm. If you're looking at it purely through that prism, Scott Brown doesn't come into the first 11 for me. No. And so, therefore, he shouldn't be playing. I get that there will be a tribute at the end of the season. That, to me, sparks even more suggestion that well, up until that point, he shouldn't play for sentimental reasons, because he's going to get his send-off, he's going to get his big hurrah, hopefully in front of some fans, like if everything continues to go the way it's going. So that is going to come. So there's even less reason to suggest putting him in just now is worth doing, because, yeah, like I say, Sorrow's got a lot of work to do. He's a bit of a rough diamond, if you want to call him that, but he's certainly a better option than Brown at the moment, so to me he should be in.
When we go back to that moment, Colin, where we seen the real arrival of David Turnbull, I know that he had played previously, but he really put his colours to the mast against Lille, performed very, very well, and he's been one of the kind of shining points of Celtic's otherwise drab season. I felt at that time that certainly Sorrow would have also played a part between that game and the end of the season, and maybe even Connor Hazard because of the goalkeeper situation. But now we're looking at a side where Turnbull has kept his place, Sorrow drops to the bench, Hazard drops out of the squad. Do you think Sorrow will be feeling hard done by the fact that he isn't a first pick for John Kennedy?
He could be. I don't think he's that kind of person, having seen the reaction that he gets when he comes on the park. I think he's just happy to be playing. So the fact that he's actually now been spoke about as if, well, why isn't he playing, as opposed to the start of the season when you're going, will we ever see Ismaila Sorrow play for Celtic? That was the kind of thoughts at the start of the season. Is he going to be one of these ones like a Kouassi Eboué who just disappears after a couple of seasons?
I was thinking more Kundai Benyu.
Kundai Benyu was the one that came into my head.
Yeah, it's the same kind of signing. But no, Sorrow's obviously impressed when he came in at first. I think recent performances haven't been to the standard that he previously set for himself. And do you know what? He's taken a bit of time to adapt to the Scottish game. I think you'll probably see half-hour run-outs now and then, and maybe the last two games of the season he'll maybe play the 90. But at this point in the season, when everything's kind of done and dusted apart from the Scottish Cup, it would be nice to see him getting a run-out, but I guess there's not really a big emphasis on who the 11 is that goes on the park, as long as you get the points.
Yeah, there is that, but I also think that you've got to do it with, regardless of whether Kennedy's here, with one eye on next season. We need to start looking at, JP's got his counter, he's got his days to the first game every single Thursday behind him on his bookshelf, and I think that as a club we need to start looking at that. Scott Brown's not going to be here next season. I think Sorrow will be feeling hard done by, or he should be. He's entitled to be, I would say, especially when you see guys like Rogic getting thrown in for a start here and there. For me, I think you're wasting your time with Tom Rogic. I think Tom Rogic's Celtic career is finished, and I wouldn't continually see if we can try and get a performance out of him as if it was 5 years ago, because that Tom Rogic is gone for me. So I wouldn't persevere with players like that. I would be persevering with guys that we have a future. They have a future at Celtic Park. So that's only one position. Laura, I'm going to come to you. Are we playing a 4-2-3-1 today? I've had a wee look at that selection, and that's how I think we'll be lining up.
Yeah, it looks that way. I don't see any other out and out striker apart from Eduard, which would suggest playing one up front. Elyounoussi, McGregor, Forrest, Turnbull, they're all your kind of like midfielders / attacking midfielders that would suggest to make up the three, and then obviously you've got Brown as well, who's the more defensive one. So yeah, that seems to me, without knowing too much about what the changes have been and the reasons why, I think a 4-2-3-1's the most obvious selection. Slightly surprising, Colin mentioned it before we came on air, but slightly surprising to see Taylor at left back, considering Laxalt's had a few games recently. Not really sure if it's just a squad rotation thing or if it's just a throw a dart at the board and see what sticks, but it's that was the only other big surprise in the team for me. Apart from that, I think everything's as you would expect, and really encouraging to see Forrest getting another start as well. It
definitely is. Colin, would you agree that that's the shape, and if so, is that with one eye on the Rangers game coming up?
I think so, definitely. 4-2-3-1 looks if it's the formation. The only one for me that I think is maybe going to be an imbalance today is on the left hand side. You're playing by what looks as if it's going to be Mohamed Elyounoussi out there, and he's going to be up against Nicky Devlin. Nicky Devlin, arguably one of the best right backs in the league at the minute. you kind of look at it and you go, Ellen Rousey's not really done a lot when he's played out on the left-hand side. He's always been better in that sort of combination role, playing off Edouard. The 1-2s, the link-up play has been really good when he's been in the middle. I don't think he's been overly effective out on the left-hand side, so we might struggle out there. You're maybe hoping for Greg Taylor to provide a bit more. But if that was the case, that's when I would have seen Diego Laxalt playing at left-back today, because he offers more of an attacking outlet. So, as Laura says, it's a bit of a surprise to see Taylor in there. One eye on next week. I'd be very surprised if there's many changes from that team to the team that plays in the Scottish Cup next Saturday.
Interesting, you mentioned Nicky Devlin. Colin, you were in the Livingston press conference prior to the Celtic game. You spoke to Devlin, you spoke to the gaffer Martindale. Were they confident going into today's game?
David Martindale's comments were actually very interesting. He says he hasn't set a target for the amount of points that they want to pick up over these next 5 games, but he does believe that he should have no fear in going to Celtic Park and having Rangers at Almondvale. He believes they're games that they can realistically pick up points in, and they're really pushing for a European spot next year. So, I mean, some of his other comments, which I'd actually dropped off the press conference by that point when he started talking about potentially picking a fight with Roy Keane if he ever became the Celtic manager, were very interesting to say the least. But he does tell you exactly how it is, which for some people will be really refreshing for Scottish football. You've seen things like him coming out and saying what he said, Brian Rice at Hamilton basically calling out referees for what he believes is an alleged bias against them. And in Scottish football, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think we've always been quite reserved. I think Livingston will definitely come out and have a go here today. Martindale knows that he's got nothing to lose. Top 6 for them is more than what they could have expected after the departure of Gary Holt earlier in the season. So they'll come out, they'll have a go at us, and I think we've got to be ready for this. It was a close game, the first game of the season. We've not beat them since. It's really going to be tight, I think, today.
A couple of points coming through. Let's dip into the comments. Thank you for getting involved on Facebook, Twitter and on YouTube. If you are watching this on YouTube, click subscribe. We're about 10 subscribers away from 11,000. Can we get over that mark during today's game against Livingston? Here's hoping. Jim G is asking, does it not make sense to play Rogic so he's in the shop window? Potentially, there is that, but then I think there's maybe an argument for a few of the guys that will be getting shipped out. I mean, Barkas, for example, you know, I said pretty early on, didn't I, that I would be playing Barkas and Ajeti for you know, the rest of the season to try and assess them. You know, and the comments that were coming through at that point were, well, you're assessing them on a training pitch, and I think there's a massive difference, to be honest with you. You know, training pitch players versus your performance in games. I think there's a huge difference there. So I would have liked to have seen Ajeti and Barkas. It's quite clear that Kennedy doesn't agree with that, because neither of them are getting much of a look in. But yeah, I take your point. I think there's a group of players, Jim, like Tom Rogic, that I would put into a category along with the likes of Near Beaton, potentially Olivier Ncham, Lee Griffiths even, players who, you know, are probably coming to the end of their career, Laura, and whose sell-on value is not going to be great. So I'm not sure if it would make a huge difference, you know, because I know Tom Rogic's agent, I'm pretty sure all season has been putting out the feelers for a move at the end of this campaign.
Yeah, the shop window argument is a difficult one, because your immediate thought is, who does it benefit? Because you're selling a player, unless it's in a situation like Edouard, where it's a player you're trying to sell for a massive fee to a bigger club, where you are getting the benefits still of them being a superior player to a lot of the other ones that you have on offer. Rogic is a situation where it doesn't benefit us today playing against Livingston to play him in the hope that there might be a scout watching who will pay money for him going forward. So, but on the other hand, I get Jim's point that there's got to be some sort of advertisement of what you can do. My only argument against that would be, I'm not sure. I have very limited knowledge of how transfers work and how far in advance they work, but I would think clubs have been tracking players for much longer than just the last couple of months of a season to know whether they want them or not. certainly in this day and age with all the statistics and information that's available at their fingertips. So I would think that anybody that was going to come in for Rogic or anybody like that would already know that they were going to come in for him, and they don't need to see extra games between now and the end of the season to make that decision. That's all guesswork on my part, but it's certainly how I would expect it to be.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you both on Tom Rogic, and I'm going to agree with Ewan Boy here that you just brought up on screen, Paul. I think there's still a lot more to come out of Tom Rogic. I think the problem you've had is you've kind of relied on him a lot for creativity this season because there hasn't been a vast amount of it. There's been nothing down the right hand side, nothing down the left hand side, and it's all had to come through the middle. Where Tom Rogic comes into his game is where he can kind of split open the defences, and that's when you're looking for a James Forrest to kind of cut inside his man and break onto the ball, or even you're expecting maybe Ryan Christie to do the same on the other side. I think there's still a lot to come out of Tom Rogic. I know that obviously there was talk that he was going to be leaving at the start of this season there, and then it took him his time to come back into the side, but when he's in top form, there's very few better than him in the league. So,
right. No, that's a good balance, and obviously you're in the same boat there as you and Boy Martin, but the words that I would highlight is when he's in top form. When was the last time you've seen that, Colin?
There's been a couple of glimpses of that this season, but I'd have to say that there's very few Celtic players this year that have shown top form. I think he's kind of the level that he's been dropped to just summarises the kind of level of the rest of the players around there. I mean, everybody knows my thoughts on Ryan Christie. I would kind of drive Ryan Christie to his next club, but there's still people in there that believe that he's a really good player. He does it for his country, you can see it. There's been a lot of these performances this season, and I guess you kind of got away with it because everybody's playing at that level. So certain players have managed to get away with that. But there's a good player in there, and you don't just become a terrible player overnight.
To come back at you on that, Colin, if you extend that argument out beyond Rogic, Lee Griffiths is arguably the best goal scorer in the league still. On his day. Barkas is an international goalkeeper who's had experience in Greece of winning titles and that kind of thing, so he's an excellent goalkeeper on his day. You know, you could extend this out to basically the 11 players that are playing today. The point is, if they're not showing it now, then, and I think the difference with Rogic in particular is he has, to me, been steadily declining in a way that makes me think that he's never going to be back at the levels we've seen before. The same with Griffiths. There's other players I would, Christie, I would probably still say has more to offer, and there's more chance of getting a good game out of him than the other two. And I think it's about looking at trends as well and seeing where the decline is headed. And I think in both Rogic and Griffiths' case, you're kind of on a hiding to nothing, expecting more from them beyond this point. But that's my opinion. That's your opinion, and that's the way it works.
I agree with you. The only thing I would kind of come back on that is saying, when you take a look at the idea of Lee Griffiths being one of the best goal scorers in the league, I mean, we're going back to a period 3 managers ago now, when he was banging in the 40 wins a season.
That's the point I'm making, though. I mean, if you make the point that on their day they're great, then you could be going back however many years to make that point.
I think with Tommy Rogic, it's all about it's about contribution, isn't it? I mean, the big frustration for me with Lee Griffiths, and I think he's a fantastic goal scorer. He's the most natural goal scorer we've got. He's a predator in and around the last third of the park. But when you look at the last 3 seasons and you think, well, on average he's played 25 games for Celtic, that's not enough. That the contribution isn't enough. And then on Rogic, another fantastic player who has provided us with some special moments. I would actually argue that he's not done enough under John Kennedy for a short time. He's been in charge, but I don't think he'd done enough under Neil Lennon during Lennon's second tenure either. I think we've seen the best of big Tom Rogic under Brendan Rodgers. So again, we're going back 2 managers ago. So yeah, I get your point, Colin. And the frustrating thing with Tom Rogic is he's only 28. So you would be expecting at this age for him to be hitting his peak. Maybe that's an old-fashioned thing for me. I always expected players to be just coming into their absolute finest at that stage, their absolute vintage. But will a new manager come in, assess what Roderick's done over the last couple of seasons and think that he is worthy of the vast wages that he's currently on, isn't he? He's one of the highest earners. I think the time is running out for players like Roderick and Griffiths, and there'll be a few others as well. I know that one of your favourites is on the bench today and near Beaton, Colin. He disappeared from view for weeks and weeks, and all of a sudden he's back on the bench. I actually expect that type of player to be leaving Celtic, along with Ncham, because obviously his Marseille move hasn't worked out. I would expect him to find another club in France, and the frustration for me is there's no way we're going to get the value that we would have expected. I mean, we're talking about Lee Griffiths potentially being freed, Colin. That's that's criminal, that's bad business. But we're in a situation where what else can you do with Lee Griffiths?
I mean, that is the thing. Is it bad business? Because again, you're talking about someone who's probably one of the highest earners at the club, and someone that probably hasn't contributed properly now for the last 4 or 5 seasons. He's a person that's received a lot of support from Celtic, and you're kind of looking for that to be repaid, and he's not really done it over the last couple of years. I mean, I know you get to the point where he said, well, he scored over 100 goals for Celtic. It's probably, pound for pound, one of the best signings that we've made over the last decade or so. But eventually everybody has a kind of time where it's time for them to move on. And for me, I think Lee Griffiths needs a fresh start, especially if he wants to prolong his career. Because he's not going to get the game time at Celtic. He's not going to be the person that comes in and plays 40, 50 games and scores you 25, 30 goals. He's not shown that, and he's not showed it for years.
No, I agree with that. I agree with that, and that's why it's so frustrating, Colin, because, if there was going to be one manager that Lee Griffiths was going to thrive under, it was going to be Neil Lennon, wasn't it? I mean, Lenny was the man who brought him in. Completely different style from Brendan Rodgers in terms of his expectations around the 24-hour athlete, which obviously Ronnie Deila, ironically enough, Griffiths had his best season under Ronnie Deila. But I would have expected that to be a meeting of minds between Lenny and Griffiths in terms of their approach to the game. It didn't work out this time round. Now, no disrespect, Colin, but Sean South's asking if you're on the bucky. The reason I brought this up No. The reason that was at Ribena is so that we can give the Snuts a wee shout out, because the Snuts obviously tweeted out last night their number one award from the UK official charts with a bottle of the tonic. So obviously it's still a popular drink of choice in West Lothian. Big shout out to the Snuts. I know their lead singer is a Celtic supporter, so if you're watching, absolutely tremendous achievement, Colin. I know you're into your music.
They've done really, really well. I think they had as much as probably not a lot of people will understand this, they had quite a bit of a battle on their hands to get to number one this weekend. I believe they were up against Demi Lovato's new album, who has a kind of mega pulling power across a certain kind of demographic. And it's probably...
Well, I was going to say, Paul John's probably cancelled out his album of the Snuts because he bought Demi Lovato's as well. So.
I'm just looking at all these great bands coming out of this hotbed of talent. And we've had a couple actually in the studio. We had one last night, and we've also been speaking to Dictator, Luke Lavolpe. You've got obviously Lewis Capaldi, Susan Boyle's from that area, you know, and they're all Celtic fans. What are you laughing at? They're all Celtic fans.
It's just you talking about this hotbed of young talent coming through and then throwing someone like Susan Boyle in there.
Didn't knock Susan Boyle. Didn't knock her, man.
Fantastic singer, but she's not young at all.
And she's a big Celtic fan, so she gets my vote. What were you thinking, Laura, over the last few days when you were reading Dedryck Boyata's take on his departure? From Susan Boyle to Dedryck Boyata, we've got it all in the Celtic State of Mind. What was your thoughts?
I think it speaks to a wider narrative about perhaps that we have rushed to judgment on players when they've left the club. I think the same thing happened with Dembele, but the tables have turned on that. I think as much as I have frustration and still anger at the way that Brendan Rodgers left and the timing of his leaving, I think I have a lot more sympathy for him than I did before, in terms of I can see the frustrations that he must have had trying to manage the club under the regime that he was under. So I think it's probably taught me a lot of lessons about not always jumping to the worst and assuming that the player is at fault. I'm just reading the banner there. That'll be hopefully be a banner at Celtic Park when we get back in. No, I think it just says a lot, and it teaches us a lot of lessons about if things look iffy on the surface, it's probably because they are, and it's not necessarily always down to the player, which I think is the first conclusion that we jump to a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, I find it interesting that around about the time when Brendan Rodgers was this, untouchable messiah, you were, I guess, as fans, you would kind of back him up, wouldn't you? And I remember around about that time being at the game and the banner coming out, and even around about that time, Lee Griffiths was getting interviewed and he was talking about how the badge on the front's more important than the name on the back of the jersey and all this kind of stuff, Colin. So I think Boyata remained silent. And for some time actually on the matter, but it now sounds as though once you get his side of the tale, that he was very much thrown under the bus by Brendan Rodgers, wasn't he?
There's been quite a few of those instances. I think you've heard it from certain players that have left the club, even down to the kind of youth team level, with guys like Jack Aitchison who have come out and told their side of the story, Calvin Miller telling their side as well. We discuss all these topics on these shows, but at the end of the day, the players have never really had the chance to come out and say what their side of the story is. You're only getting to see what Celtic are telling you, or what the press are telling you, or what you're hearing from inside the club. But I've got a lot of respect for Dedryck Boyata. I think he quite quietly went about his business. I know he kind of had that period where he refused to play, or was advised to refuse to play by his agent. But I mean, quite quietly, he worked himself back into a team. He gave everything whilst he was still playing for us. And it was disappointing to see him kind of leave in the circumstances that he did. We've now kind of found out what happened behind the scenes and what led to that. And maybe it's just a case of not judging every book by its cover.
Yeah, it was interesting. I'm always, interested to hear what ex-Celts say. Some good, some bad, some indifferent. But the Boyata story was one that I was interested to read because it does paint Brendan Rodgers in a different light. But while we're on the subject of Celtic managers, we're in a situation now where it would seem that Eddie Howe's agent is looking down south to see what kind of options are available, and therefore we've been a little bit premature in thinking that Celtic have this deal over the line. It's still active, it's still live, but Colin, I'll ask you first, do you think the club are already looking at option 2, 3 and possibly even 4 at this moment in time?
I generally don't think so. I honestly don't. There's nothing that suggests that we're a club that's already got a backup plan if something doesn't go through. I think they're just going back and reworking this deal and reworking it, taking their time on it. He's their number one choice, and then if he eventually turns it down, they'll go and work on something else. It's not like Celtic to be forward planning to have a plan B if something goes wrong.
The reason I asked, Laura, we know that there's been discussions obviously with Eddie Howe. We also know that there's been discussions with Roy Keane. Hopefully Russell Boyce is watching, because he was driving the Roy Keane bus for a while. I would expect 1 or 2 others over and above that. I mean, I don't know for sure, but you would expect 3 or 4 on the shortlist, wouldn't you? And if that's the case, and if Colin is right and we haven't been pursuing anyone else, we really could be left with egg on our faces once it comes round to the summer and a decision's made by Eddie Howe.
Yeah, well, the criticism we've had of Peter Lawwell and the way that Neil Lennon was appointed was this old, and I hate reusing the same phrases, but this idea that they didn't look at the rest of the applications that were in the drawer. So you would hope that, although what Colin's saying is right, we've got a track record of that thing, you would hope they've learned from that mistake and have a few plates spinning, so to speak, in the whole search for a manager, and do have a plan A, B, C and D. The one thing I would say is I'm not as negative about it being a back and forth for Eddie Howe, and it being more difficult to convince him to come, because that suggests to me that he's quite principled, and that's what I would look for in a manager going forward. I think he would, if he did get it over the line, he would be able to then, hold court as far as what he wants to happen would be concerned. And I also think it's no bad thing to have a manager who's looking at other options, because that suggests he has other options, and if he does have other options, then he must be a desirable candidate for any club, and those are the type of people we should be going after. You don't want to be going after somebody that nobody else will touch with a barge pole. I can think of one other person we've spoken to that might come into that category, and I think I worded that all right to get away with it. I'm not confirming or denying, but you know that's what I mean. It's like it's trying to appreciate that if you're wanting to go for the best, you have to expect these things to happen, because the best things in life don't come easy, as they say. I think that's a song lyric from somewhere. Demi Lovato, maybe.
I'll confirm that at half time. Laura, I think that really is a good way to sum up the situation at the moment. The players are on the park, so we're going to join the action, and we will be back at half time to analyse the first half against Livingston. Thank you, Colin Watt. Thank you, Laura Bradburn, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.